It took exactly 47 seconds for the room to go silent. The microphones hummed, lights flickered against polished mahogany, and the camera's words softly, capturing every detail. Representative Jasmine Crockett adjusted the papers stacked before her, the weight of questions yet unasked pressing as heavily as the fluorescent glow overhead. $2 billion. Hidden. Unaccounted for. The nation, perched on the edge of disbelief, was about to witness scrutiny collide with secrecy. The Senate hearing room was unusually still that morning. Rows of seats lined with aides and press photographers stretched beneath a ceiling of stark fluorescent panels, the marble floors reflecting an austere symmetry. At the center, a long, polished mahogany table bore the nameplates of key witnesses and officials, men and women whose expressions, carefully practiced over years, now betrayed subtle tremors. Papers rustled, pens scratched against legal pads, and the faint click of a gavel echoed against the cold walls. Jasmine Crockett stood at her podium, calm, precise, her tailored navy suit sharp against the muted tones of the chamber. Her eyes scanned the assembled witnesses, lingering briefly on a man whose confident facade had begun to falter the moment he stepped inside. She began the session with a deliberate, almost cinematic pacing. Good morning. Today, we examine the financial disclosures and offshore holdings connected to the Trump family. $2 billion, transferred, hidden, or unreported. Our obligation is simple: transparency. The law demands it. The Constitution demands it. Her voice carried the weight of legal authority, measured yet undeniable, each word punctuated by the silent expectation of accountability. The witnesses shifted in their chairs. One, a senior financial officer, cleared his throat nervously, avoiding direct eye contact. Another adjusted his tie, attempting a semblance of composure. Crockett's team had prepared meticulously, subpoenas served, documents cataloged, and financial trails mapped with precise forensic accuracy. The hearing was not merely ceremonial. It was a confrontation of law against obfuscation, fact against carefully cultivated image. Cameras angled sharply, capturing every subtle gesture. A hand tremor, a glance at the wrong document, the almost imperceptible bite of a lip in hesitation. Outside the chamber, reporters jotted notes furiously, their eyes fixed on the live feed. Inside, silence fell in deliberate intervals, punctuated only by the soft scratching of pens on legal pads. The temperature seemed to lower by degrees, the air thick with anticipation. Crockett's opening questions were calm, almost conversational, but each carried an invisible weight. Have all transfers above $50 million been disclosed to the Committee on Financial Oversight? Were any of these funds routed through foreign shell entities? Do you acknowledge Section 6038D of the Internal Revenue Code, requiring the reporting of specified foreign financial accounts? The witnesses' attempts at prepared answers faltered, hesitation and micro-expressions betraying inner calculations. Every syllable was measured, every pause loaded with potential consequences. The chamber lights reflected off polished surfaces, creating a sharp contrast between the public spectacle and the intimate scrutiny of individual conscience. Every movement, from a shift of weight to a subtle hand tremor, was magnified. Crockett's eyes did not waver. Her voice did not crack. She had rehearsed this, anticipated every response, every evasion, every half-truth. Yet, beneath the professional rhythm, an undercurrent of uncertainty rippled. The financial web was vast, complex, and deliberately opaque. $2 billion could vanish in a single sentence, yet Crockett's team had traced its path with precision. And today, the truth would be extracted, methodically, legally, unflinchingly. The witnesses understood this. The nation understood this. And then, in that charged stillness, the first inkling of collapse appeared, not in words, but in hesitation. A pause longer than any protocol demanded, a swallowed answer, a shift of gaze. The cameras captured it all. The audience, unseen but omnipresent, sensed it. But the silence wasn't over yet. The room remained taut with anticipation as Crockett leaned forward slightly, her hands resting deliberately on the edges of the podium. She spoke again, softer this time, yet each word cut sharply through the chamber's charged atmosphere. Let us begin with the disclosures. Can you confirm whether the Trump family reported all foreign financial interests exceeding $10 million to the Committee on Financial Oversight? Her voice was calm, journalistic, measured, the kind that compels truth without raising a hand. The lead witness, a sharply suited man with thinning gray hair, shifted in his seat. His fingers drummed nervously against the mahogany table. Representative Crockett, the family has complied with all standard reporting requirements. His words, intended to exude confidence, faltered under the weight of the room's scrutiny. He avoided direct eye contact, glancing instead at a stack of documents meticulously arranged before him. Senator Hargrove, seated to Crockett's left, interjected with the quiet precision of seasoned inquiry. Mr. Thompson, are you aware of the stipulations under Section 6038D of the Internal Revenue Code? Specifically, the requirement to report foreign trusts if the aggregate value exceeds $100,000. His tone was calm, almost conversational, but the question carried an implicit legal threat. The witness hesitated. A micro-expression flickered, an almost imperceptible tightening of the jaw, the faint twitch of an eyelid. Yes, I'm aware of the requirement, he murmured, voice betraying uncertainty. His hand, previously steady, now trembled as it gripped the pen. Camera flashes highlighted the subtle tension, each blink magnified under the unforgiving lens. Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in unwavering focus. She pressed further. Were any of the transfers routed through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands? Were these accounts declared under the Foreign Agents Registration Act? The room's atmosphere thickened. A low murmur ran through the aides. Papers shuffled. The witness cleared his throat, hands clasped tightly. Some transfers were made via corporate subsidiaries abroad. But his voice faltered, the carefully rehearsed script crumbling under the precision of legal inquiry. Senator Ortiz leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. You're aware that failure to disclose under FORA can result in civil and criminal penalties, including fines up to $250,000 and imprisonment up to 5 years. Her question was a quiet hammer, legal accuracy wielded as a tool of narrative pressure. A soft clicking sound punctuated the tense silence, pens moving across legal pads, camera shutters in synchronized bursts, the low hum of microphones. Every witness shift became exaggerated, magnified by the chamber's oppressive attention. The room felt simultaneously vast and intimate, each breath a potential confession. Crockett allowed the pause to linger, then asked the final question of the sequence. Mr. Thompson, can you provide documented evidence that all $2 billion in offshore transfers were reported accurately and in accordance with both the Appropriations Act and the Treasury regulations governing financial transparency? The witness exhaled audibly, the sound amplified by the chamber's marble walls. His eyes flicked to a document folder, then back to Crockett, and finally to the cameras, each flash capturing the subtle disintegration of composure. The room seemed to constrict around him, mahogany and marble closing in with silent accusation. The first cracks were visible, small but undeniable. Hesitation, shifting gaze, trembling hands. The testimony was no longer a performance. It had become a legal and moral reckoning. For the senators, the questions were measured. For the witness, every syllable was a trap. A pause hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the next revelation. And in that pause, the first whisper of panic emerged. The whisper of panic rippled quietly at first, barely perceptible beneath the low hum of microphones and the rustling of papers. Then it became unmistakable. Mr. Thompson, the lead financial officer, fumbled through the thick folder before him, a bead of sweat tracing a slow path down his temple. Crockett's gaze remained steady, unblinking, as if measuring not only the truth but the conscience behind each hesitation. Let's examine internal correspondence, she said, her voice precise. Emails between your office and the Trump family's accounting team. Can you confirm whether these reflect accurate reporting to the Treasury Department? A hush fell over the chamber. The witnesses exchanged nervous glances, fingers twitching over tablets and documents. The senators leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished table, eyes narrowing. Senator Hargrove's pen scratched rapidly across a legal pad, noting each minor inflection, each pause. "Mr. Thompson," he interjected calmly, Section 302 of the Appropriations Act mandates that all transfers exceeding $50 million receive prior notification to Congress. Were these notifications submitted in accordance with that statute? Thompson swallowed hard, his throat dry. "To my knowledge, some notifications were submitted, though there may have been clerical discrepancies." His voice was flat, almost mechanical, betraying the fragility beneath the practiced demeanor. A faint flicker of unease passed through the room. Camera flashes reflected off the mahogany surface, catching the slight tremor in his hands. Crockett leaned in, allowing silence to do part of the work. She flicked a document toward the witness, the edges sliding across the table with a sharp scrape. "These memos, dated over the past 3 fiscal years, show multiple discrepancies between reported and actual offshore holdings. Can you explain why FISA 702 compliance reports and Treasury oversight files appear incomplete or missing?" The room's air seemed to thicken, the faint smell of polished wood and printed paper pressing against every attendee. Thompson's fingers dug into the folder, trembling. His gaze darted across the documents, then to Crockett, then toward the cameras capturing his every falter. The discrepancies were under review, but I cannot confirm compliance on every item," he stammered. His voice was uneven, betraying the strain of legal exposure. Senator Ortiz's tone remained calm, almost soothing, but it carried an undeniable edge of scrutiny. "Are you aware that failing to report under Section 6038D and FORA can constitute a direct violation of federal law? That non-compliance could result in both civil and criminal proceedings, including imprisonment." Thompson's eyes widened slightly. He fumbled with a pen, setting it down and clasping his hands as if seeking physical support. Crockett's next question sliced through the tension with surgical precision. "Your office cites executive privilege on several communications. Can you specify the exact legal basis for that claim, including any statutory references or precedent cases?" The witness hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at a senior counsel seated behind him, who shook a subtle, worried nod. The chamber lights glinted off polished surfaces, and the silence became deafening. Each flash of the camera seemed to punctuate his growing anxiety, reflecting off his perspiring brow, magnifying the fissures in his testimony. In that tense, measured atmosphere, the contradictions became undeniable. Memos conflicted with sworn statements. Budget reports vanished into ambiguous accounting entries, and references to FISA 702 and appropriations compliance only deepened the suspicion. The meticulous veneer of financial transparency had begun to crumble, leaving a fragile skeleton of legal accountability exposed to the relentless scrutiny of the committee. And then, the first whisper of real panic surfaced. Not a sound, but a subtle shift in posture, a silent admission that the unraveling had begun. It happened in a heartbeat, measured by the unblinking cameras and the collective gaze of the chamber. 4 to 7 seconds that stretched into an eternity. Mr. Thompson, the lead financial officer, froze mid-sentence, eyes wide, hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly that his knuckles whitened. The air seemed to thicken, fluorescent lights reflecting off his sweat-dampened hair, while the faint scent of polished wood mingled with tension and fear. Representative Jasmine Crockett observed silently, every micro-expression catalogued, the subtle tremor in his left hand, the darting of his gaze toward the senior counsel behind him, the involuntary swallow that betrayed his inner turmoil. She waited, allowing the seconds to stretch, forcing the chamber, and the nation watching live, to feel the weight of accountability. "Mr. Thompson," she said finally, calm but unyielding, "can you now provide documentation proving compliance with Section 6038D of the Internal Revenue Code, the Appropriations Act, and the FISA 702 oversight requirements for all $2 billion in transfers?" His eyes flicked to the folder before him. Nothing. A silence, so heavy it pressed against the walls, filled the room. Pens hovered over notepads, Camera flashes momentarily blinded the room, capturing every detail. The twitch of a lip, a hand raised to the forehead in desperation. 4 to 7 seconds passed, and in each, the veneer of composure cracked further. I cannot, he finally stammered, voice breaking under the strain. The words, simple and unadorned, carried the force of legal collapse. Every regulation he failed to cite, every disclosure he could not produce, became a damning testimony in itself. Crockett's calm demeanor never faltered. The moral and legal gravity of the moment carried the weight. The constitutional and statutory implications were immediate and severe. By failing to provide documentation under Section 6038D, Thompson exposed the Trump family to potential civil and criminal penalties, violating federal law. By misreporting or omitting transfers, he had breached the Appropriations Act, undermining Congress's oversight powers. Executive privilege claims crumbled under the precision of questioning, leaving the witnesses vulnerable to contempt charges. The room, designed for deliberation, became a theater of collapse. Crockett's gaze swept over the chamber as the silence deepened. Senators shifted in their seats, pens still poised, eyes alert. "You are aware," she continued evenly, "that withholding, misreporting, or obstructing compliance with congressional oversight not only violates statutory law but also undermines the due process clause of the Constitution." The effect was instantaneous. Thompson's shoulders slumped, the weight of legal reality pressing visibly against him. A slight tremor ran down his spine. The cameras captured it all, the human dimension of failure, magnified by law, history, and national expectation. 4 to 7 seconds, and a professional facade evaporated. The gavel's faint tap punctuated the collapse. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously. Microphones recorded every wavering syllable. The room held its breath as the witness slumped further into his chair, words abandoned, documentation absent, credibility shattered. And in that precise moment, 4 to 7 seconds of inaction and admission, the nation witnessed a breakdown not merely of a person, but of the legal armor intended to protect billions in undisclosed transfers. The chamber lights reflected off polished surfaces, accentuating the gravity, the legal, political, and moral collapse laid bare. The silence lingered, not just as absence of sound, but as an indictment. The first wave of consequences had begun, institutional and public, and the nation would not forget those 4 to 7 seconds. The aftermath was immediate, relentless, and unavoidable. Within minutes, news outlets across the nation scrambled to cover the 4 to 7 second collapse. Television screens flickered in homes, bars, and offices, replaying every microsecond of Thompson's faltering testimony. On cable news, anchors spoke in measured urgency. For 4 to 7 seconds, America watched competence collapse, intoned one anchor, voice low and deliberate, as footage of Thompson's trembling hands filled the screen. Another added, constitutional scholars called it the most devastating Senate takedown since Watergate. Digital platforms exploded with commentary. Analysts dissected every line of questioning, every hesitation, every glance. Legal experts appeared on panels, parsing the implications of Section 6038D, the Appropriations Act, and FISA 702, explaining in granular detail why the witness's failure was not merely embarrassing, but potentially criminal. What we saw was not just a human failure, one scholar said, voice steady against a backdrop of scrolling financial charts. It was a violation of federal law and an erosion of congressional oversight, the very checks and balances that safeguard our democracy. In the halls of power, the reverberations were no less intense. Senators convened privately, reviewing the transcripts, the financial statements, and the memos that had been revealed. Senior staffers whispered behind closed doors, calculating political ramifications. The Department of Justice opened preliminary inquiries, scrutinizing discrepancies highlighted during the hearing. Congressional committees prepared follow-up subpoenas, citing incomplete reporting, misrepresentation of offshore accounts, and potential obstruction of oversight duties. Meanwhile, social media erupted. Citizens debated the implications of unreported transfers, legal accountability, and the role of congressional oversight. News outlets posted side-by-side comparisons of reported figures and internal memos. $2 billion vanished, read one headline. Transparency ignored. Law neglected, screamed another. The symbolic weight of the 4 to 7 second breakdown became shorthand for institutional failure and the fragility of political trust. Within the Trump family's inner circle, panic was subtle but palpable. Advisors scrambled to reconcile missing records. Legal teams prepared emergency filings, and press statements were drafted to mitigate reputational damage. Every delay, every misstep, was now magnified under the relentless glare of public and institutional scrutiny. Crockett, meanwhile, maintained composure. Her team compiled the session's evidence into a meticulous report, documenting not only the testimony but the broader legal violations it revealed. Press conferences were scheduled, formal letters to the DOJ drafted, and hearings for continued oversight arranged. The moral and procedural rigor of the committee contrasted sharply with the witnesses' collapse, reinforcing the narrative of accountability. By evening, commentators summarized the day's events with a sense of measured horror. One anchor said, "We are witnessing a rare moment when law, politics, and public scrutiny collide, revealing both human error and institutional vulnerability." Another noted, "For 4 to 7 seconds, the public watched a system designed to ensure transparency buckle under the weight of omission and evasion." In the marble corridors of Congress, aides whispered among themselves, reflecting the broader unease. Phones rang, memos were circulated, and every step of procedural follow-up was plotted with precision. Washington had reacted, but the story was far from over. Even as night fell, the chamber lights from the morning's hearing continued to reflect off polished surfaces in video loops, projecting a stark reminder. Accountability had been enforced, but only at the cost of exposing the fragility of systems, reputations, and the law itself. The nation, attentive and critical, watched as the first waves of consequences rippled outward. The hearing room was empty now, its polished mahogany tables bathed in the soft glow of late-afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Microphones, once alive with the low hum of questioning, rested silently. Papers lay stacked, some marked with hastily scribbled notes, others untouched, preserved as evidence of the confrontation that had shaken Washington. The echoes of 4 to 7 seconds lingered, not in sound, but in memory, a reminder of the weight of law and the fragility of human composure. Representative Jasmine Crockett remained behind briefly, alone at the podium, her posture relaxed yet deliberate. She traced the rim of a legal folder with her fingertips, reflecting on the meticulous balance between accountability and justice. In political theaters such as this, appearances often mask truths, and truths demand a relentless pursuit. $2 billion in unreported transfers, contradictions in memos, and evasive testimony had exposed the chasm between legal responsibility and personal protection. She understood, as she always had, that the law's authority is not measured by compliance alone, but by the courage to enforce it when challenged. Outside the chamber, the world continued its relentless pace. News cycles churned, social media buzzed, and public opinion formed and reformed with every replay of the witnesses' breakdown. Constitutional scholars debated, journalists analyzed, and lawyers parsed each statement for precedent and implication. Washington, as always, observed with clinical detachment. Institutions moved, adjusted, and recalibrated. Yet, beneath the procedural momentum, a moral lesson lingered. Power and wealth are no shield against the precise mechanisms of law when wielded with vigilance and intellect. The Trump family's inner circle worked feverishly to reconcile documents, address legal vulnerabilities, and contain reputational damage. Counselors drafted statements, lawyers prepared filings, and aides navigated the labyrinthine channels of compliance and oversight. But the silence left by those 4 to 7 seconds persisted, heavier than any immediate consequence. It was the silence of accountability met, of missteps exposed, and of a system functioning exactly as designed, imperfectly human, yet ultimately governed by law. Crockett's reflection extended beyond the chamber. Political theater often obscures ethics, and ethics often yield to expediency. But today, she realized, law had imposed a reckoning that transcended partisanship. The room, the documents, the questions, they were all instruments not of vengeance, but of constitutional fidelity. The public had witnessed that fidelity, stark and unflinching, and in doing so, had absorbed a lesson in civic responsibility. Her final glance at the empty chamber lingered on the polished floors, the high windows, the scattered notes, and the faint reflection of a nation watching. $2 billion had been questioned. Silence had been earned. Consequences, procedural and moral, had begun their course. The narrative of power, secrecy, and oversight had been written not in rhetoric, but in law, deliberate questioning, and precise observation. Some careers end in scandal. Others end in quiet reflection. His ended in silence. And for the nation, the lesson remained clear. Washington doesn't punish ignorance. It replaces it.